Hi students, welcome to lesson number 21 on displacement and its impact on women. The introduction for the lesson. People have been displaced from their homelands for ages due to natural calamities, wars and other atrocities, policy decisions that have redrawn territorial lines or developmental work like building dams. So, issue of gender has largely been ignored while dealing with the issue of displacement. Calamities and wars have different impacts on women and men, but there are barely any norms policies to take this into account. The interventions that are undertaken need to take into account different context and a gendered approach. The idea of one size fits all may end up being insensitive to the gender dimensions of the problem as well as to the local context. The management of refugee camps, sexual violence resulting from displacement, implementation of international guidelines, impact of interventions, these are some of the important issues that need a gendered approach while undertaking interventions. Let us now explore how displacement brings drastic changes in the lives of women and men. The objectives of this lesson is to make the students understand why women are marginalized in the process of displacement and what are the impacts on them, as well as the negative impact shows their vulnerability to further marginalization in the family as well as society. Now, what is displacement? Forcing of communities and individuals out of their homes, often also their homelands, for the purpose of economic development is displacement. Each year, millions of people around the globe are forcefully relocated and resettled away from their homes, lands and livelihoods in order to make way for large scale development projects. It is a profound socio-economic and cultural disruption for those affected. Dislocation breaks up living patterns and social continuity. Displacement results not just in material loss, but an existential crisis in general. The social roles and codes are eroded. The gender roles of men and women are redrawn in a bid to survive the new environment. The larger social support and the kinship ties that bind a community vanish. Often forced to live in refugee camps, the mobility and the opportunities of a community become heavily restricted. So, there are new rules to operate by, new ways in which social relationships function. In war-like situations, families often flee without their young male members and women are left to fend for their families. There could be barely any opportunities to earn and many women do not have previous experience of working outside their households. One can see how displacement has gendered effects. The burden of trauma is different from men and women. The number of women-headed households and women breadwinners often goes up by leaps in such situations. Their men having been killed, captured or involved in war, women become very vulnerable to sexual and other violence in their lawless state. Rival factions target these vulnerable women deliberately, since the patriarchal understanding of revenge always has been to maim the rival factions' women, as women are supposedly the repositories of honor in patriarchal cultures. Now, let us look at the consequences of displacement on women. Gender has found a place in displacement for development situations, added as an additive, while displacement and its consequences as a development policy has engulfed both men and women alike. Curiously enough, development policies have more often than not sidelined the latter. The lack of gender sensitivity puts women in an extremely disadvantageous position to face displacement and its often severe, traumatic and unsettling effects. The terms family and household interchangeably used as a unit for compensation. The entire process of displacement, including rehabilitation, targets the family as a unit, and within the family, the woman is the mother, daughter or sister. Her identity does not go beyond these stated dependent relationships, and policies rarely address the needs, if any, of the dependents. The concept of family implied joint family, in which the married sons with the children and other adult members were considered as members of one unit. With this concept, only one male member was paid compensation, while the rest of the other male and female family members were not entitled to the compensation. The household, in fact, should imply a nuclear family, and like male headed household, it should imply a male or a female headed family. Further, with the interchangeable use of family and household, generally a joint family system was rewarded compensation, and in the process other adult members as well as single women were not recognized for compensation. So, lack of compensation implies lack of production system or financial assistance, and source of livelihood was not provided to women. And as a consequence, the single women and the children suffered marginalization in the post-displacement phase. Now, if the concept of joint property ownership was neglected, by and large, law or customs or both have excluded women in India from owning or inheriting land and property. Men have mostly determined the control over land in terms of its management, use and disposal. So, this lack of ownership, however, made women enormously vulnerable, forever dependent and at a greater risk of being excluded from their homes and livelihoods. So, in a displacement situation, it is this ownership of land or property which ultimately governs one's entitlements to compensation and rehabilitation. So, in cases wherein land for land was allotted to the project affected families, the ownership of the land was given to an adult male as the head of the family. So, no project authority thought of joint ownership of land with both man and a woman as joint landholders. So, women did not view land only as an object for which they need and to establish their legal title. So, for women, the land concealed their values, their status within broader social relationships and as a sense of personal, social and livelihood security. With allotment of land to the adult male in the family, the women were deprived of their right to own land, and they were also deprived of recognition as earning members of the family, who in turn worked for a long period of time in the fields and contributed more than half of the total income in the family, undermining capabilities of women and other male adults to undertake skillful work. So, in projects where a job was offered as a part of compensation to adult male members, the capability of women and elderly to earn their home based activities was overlooked. And this reinforced the existing cultural norm that the adult young man be seen as a breadwinner and head of the family. Next, siphoning of cash, compensation and marginalization of the vulnerable people in the family in cases where the compensation was paid in cash, as many studies have been indicated that it was mere to begin with. So, experience have indicated that many small and marginal farmers could not buy a piece of land in a new place with the compensation amount. So, in most cases, the men spent the compensation amount without investing it profitably and without consulting anyone in the family. So, in some cases, a clever member siphoned the money and cheated the women, especially widows, children and elderly. Thus, in most cases, these members were deprived of their share in the compensation. Another aspect is the lack of gender and equity perspectives. And here the studies have been indicated that rehabilitation packages are blind to the perspectives of both gender and equity. Almost all projects authorities have tried to narrow down the definition of displacement, rehabilitation and compensation. In doing so, they have not only reinforced the inequitable social norms, but have also supported and promoted the traditional hierarchy amongst family members. Consequently, the weaker member of the family have been neglected. Moreover, decisions have been implemented so thoroughly that the PAPs cannot achieve better quality of life, making the weaker family members experiencing go through additional hardships. And there are no recognition of the right to control over common property resources, that is CPRs, and natural resources. The state has continued to own natural resources across India as been discussed earlier, and the right of the community, especially of women, to control and manage the CPRs has been denied. This has been resulted in the increase of women's and the girls' child work burden, that is to collect fuel, fodder, water, etc. for household activities. And this burden is increased manifold in cases wherein households are relocated to new sites which are far from the natural resources, thereby increasing the drudgery for women and girl child. There is also a lack of coordination among different government departments and ministries. So, there are various cases which I can present now, and there is one particular case from Gujarat, that is the displaced from the Gir forest in Gujarat. It has been found that 845 pastoral families from the Gir forest were resettled in revenue villages in 8 blocks of Junagadh district during 70s and 80s. And the infrastructure facilities were provided as extension of overall infrastructure of the host village. Currently, after about 2 decades of resettlement, the capacity of the displaced pastoral families to have equitable access to the available infrastructure facilities remains a distant dream. So, the families which were marginal in number to begin with are marginalized even in terms of the social status. So, impoverishment, lack of political support has marginalized them further. So, one of the main causes for impoverishment of the displaced family was the change from pastoral to agricultural activities which they could not cope with. And this has also brought unexpected consequences in the lives of the women, which compares the pastoral families and women's lives in the forest. How was it before displacement and how is it after the settlement and the colonies. Now, let us look at the impact of displacement on the quality of life of pastoral women given the story. The impact is that, first one, the changes in the life pattern and in the economy have caused deterioration in the standard of living and increased the work burden. So, women have to earn their livelihood through multiple income generation activities like agricultural or casual labours and animal husbandry. Secondly, in the forest, most household requirements of fuel, fodder and forest minor producers like fruits, medicinal herbs, shrubs used for washing and cleaning were available free of cost. Now, outside the forest, they have to pay for each requirement, whether it is soap or medicine. With greater impoverishment, the purchasing capacity is reduced and the women are unable to buy commodities for basic needs. Similarly, they are unable to pay for other requirements like education, health care, electricity and transportation, which have been instrumental in the deterioration in the standard of living. More than 50% of the families from the resettlement colonies have migrated in search of livelihood. The loss of access to natural resources has also resulted in loss of traditional knowledge about uses of herbs and shrubs. This is a major change. And changes in the food habits and dispossession of natural resources have made the traditional system and food useless. The families are now dependent on modern healthcare system, ration shops, etc. And many women feel humiliated and disgusted with the dependence on government system, where supply is irregular and the personnel of these institutions like doctors or paramedical staff or the fair price shop owners, etc. discriminate and humiliate them as poor. Another major aspect is the loss of assets has pushed families into a debt cycle, and they have difficulties in performing social obligations and in getting loans from financial institutions to start income generation activities. And lack of assets have also resulted in lack of social security. So, next point, with exposure to new environment, these families were expected to participate in political and social activities more easily. However, in most cases with impoverishment, lack of positive effects of exposure and limited numeric strength, they are unable to do so. So, they cannot even make their presence felt in the Gram Panchayat to get support from political leaders, and consequently are unable to get funds for developmental activities in their respective resettlement colonies. There is also lack of basic amenities, and infrastructure facilities have been made them dependent, causing further marginalization in all spheres of life. Another important aspect is with physical dislocation, they have entered a new and unknown area. Initially, they face hostility from the host villages, which often resulted in clashes and violence. The difference and clashes were generally for drinking water and use of infrastructure facilities like schools. And in the absence of social and religious celebrations with other community members and neighbors, the women feel isolated and uprooted. Now, let us take one more case from Baroda city of Gujarat of displaced women. At some level, displacement meant de-skilling for women as well as reduction in social status. During the 1990s, there were some incidences of communal violence in Baroda, and some women were displaced due to the violence. These women feel that secularizing factors does not operate all the time because caste demarcations remain very clear in new areas, and most of the studies on the impact of displacement of women have found that the women have suffered more than men due to displacement. The key impacts are like the first one, single women had to suffer more as all the support structures collapsed with displacement. Secondly, many women felt that there are more economic opportunities in urban areas compared to rural areas. However, they also felt the loss of traditional skills, social support, especially for social occasions, and sometimes economic support. So, under the greater economic pressure, most women take up unskilled jobs and very few have the opportunity to train in other skills. Third, surprisingly, many men could get the benefit of government schemes, while despite their awareness, the women could not benefit from them. And the studies indicates that whenever there is unemployment, that is jobs are scarce, the women are the first to lose their jobs. The women find that they have to settle for unskilled wage labor, which is often irregular and underpaid. And secondly, dislocation and relocation in another area, unless very carefully executed, means a breakdown in community networks. So, for women, the community and the family networks are very important support system. Since their dependence on them is greater, a breakdown in this network creates tremendous insecurity and trauma. So, the women experience this more than men, who are usually more mobile and relatively less dependent on these networks. Third, there is a rise in social disturbance reflected by alcoholism, gambling and theft. So, this increase in social problem has directly affected the lives and status of women by way of violence inflicted on them. Fourthly, the most adverse consequence for women were higher incidence of sexual assault, exploitation and often forced to become sex workers. And fifth, One major worry voiced by women was regarding the marriage of their daughters. Some new traditions have been reported. Earlier, there were no traditions of dowry, but now it is become a fashion. And sixth, female headed households require special mention to understand their vulnerability, and sometimes the specific problems of this group are expected to be solved at the policy or at the implementation level. For example, the system of Devadasi is recognized as a cultural practice, but the rights of Devadasis are neither articulated nor recognized by the state. Mostly, they are deprived by the state and are neglected as a deviant group by society. Seventh, destitute, deserted and diverse women and widows face problems due to the present legal framework and norms accepted by the state. So, their exclusion in rehabilitation packages reflects the prevalent norms of society reinforced by the state. However, there are studies which have shown positive results of resettlement on women, and this include more or better opportunities for economic activities, girl children going to school, higher mobility and freedom from old customs of parda, getting lands as a permanent productive asset, etc. And many studies also give the credit for better environments and the resettlement area to the NGOs working with DPs. To summarize, in the past, when a family was displaced, compensation was paid mostly in cash or kind as against the immovable property. So, compensation was generally paid to the adult male members of a family. So, there was no special consideration for women, children or old persons in the family. Therefore, these members became non-entities for compensation. The category of women female headed household was neglected and the women had to suffer even greater hardships along with her children and other dependents. Consequently, there was significant deterioration in the quality of life of women, children and other members of the family, those who are elders. And irrespective of this patrilineal or matrilineal system, the ownership of property largely remained with the male members of the family. Women were denied their right over family property as they have not been seen as an equal owner of the property. Women lost control over land and common property resources as well as natural resources along with other assets and consequently further marginalized within the family. With very little information available about the impact of displacement on the quality of life of women, children and other members, more emphasis was given to understand their needs and concerns. Thank you.